Hi. Hoş geldiniz. Welcome. My name is Burcu Karahan. I'm teaching Turkish literature here at Comparative Literature Department. Welcome to an evening with Ece Temelkuran. Let's wait. Okay. So tonight was made possible by a couple of programs at the university. I want to say our thanks to them. Abbasi Program in Islamic Studies, the Stanford Humanities Center here, the Department of Comparative Literature, Division of Literatures, Cultures and Languages, CDDRL, and Mediterranean Studies Forum. So for those of you who may not be that familiar with Ece Temelkuran and her work, I will make a brief introduction. I'll briefly introduce Ece and her work, and then I'll take the privilege of asking a couple of questions myself, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. A couple of things that Zach wanted me to remind you: we have books on sale outside, and we're planning to finish the question and answer by 8, and then you will have half an hour to talk to Ece Temelkuran or have your book signed. Ece is one of Turkey's best-known journalists, political commentators, and contemporary novelists. She started her career in journalism as a reporter at one of Turkey's oldest and most prestigious dailies, Cumhuriyet, the Republic, and continued as senior political columnist for Milliyet, another leading daily in Turkey, and then for Haberturk, right? She has published widely and won numerous awards for her work, including the Pen for Peace Award and Turkish Journalist of the Year Award. She is the author of several books on wide-ranging topics, from hunger strikes by political prisoners in Turkey to the politics and everyday life in Chavez's Venezuela. Temelkuran's investigative journalism is so fierce and unapologetic that she faced it's a compliment that she faced the same fate as most of her colleagues in Turkey and ended up being fired from her position at Haberturk Daily in 2012, mainly for her critical work on Turkish government's handling of, among many things, Roboski massacre. Since then, she is a regular contributor for New York Times, Le Monde, The Guardian, where just 2 days ago she just published an open letter to the Queen asking her to say "tamam, that is enough" in Turkish to President Erdogan, a letter that caused quite a stir on social media, right? And unfortunately. But apart from her journalism, Ece Temelkuran is also the writer of 3 very popular novels. Her first novel, Banana Sounds, Muz Sesleri, published in 2010, is a love story that takes place in 3 different cities, notably all outside of Turkey. The main locale of the novel is Beirut. The novel is almost a panegyric and ode to Beirut. In that novel, the love you feel for that city is so tangible that it oozes from almost every page. So her second novel, Women Who Blow on Nuts, Düğümlere Üfleyen Kadınlar, came out in early 2013 after she was fired and immediately preceding the Gezi protests in Turkey. The novel is a road trip story of 4 Middle Eastern women that takes place in the Middle East, but again outside of Turkey. So although, I want to add something here, although there are a few Turkish novels that are set in European cities, such as Paris and London, it is incredibly rare to find a novel that is set in the Middle East in Turkey, like Refik Halit Karay's. Some of Refik Halit Karay's are exile stories, and İsmail Hekimoğlu's Minyeli Abdullah are the only ones that I could think of that are set in the Middle East. But to have 2 consecutive novels that take place in the Middle East is simply unprecedented in Turkish literature. But in her 3rd and most recent novel, The Time of Mute Swans, Devir in Turkish, which roughly means era, but there's a pun on the name as well. Devir means era in Turkish, but it's although not etymologically, but phonetically is really close to the term revolution in Turkish, devrim. And also devir means, the verb form of devir from Arabic, it means to hand over something, to turn something over to someone else.
It's also an imperative form of bring down.
Yes. So as you can see, the titles of her novels are quite interesting. But in her third novel, I was saying, The Time of Mute Swans, it was published in 2015, she brings it back home to Turkey. The novel takes place in the heart of Turkey, in the capital Ankara, and it tells the story of Ankara immediately preceding one of the bloodiest military coups in Turkey, September 12, 1980. So it is kind of a coup novel. I mean, Turkish history is so rich with military coups that we have a subgenre in Turkish literature, that we have military coup novels, which are in themselves categorized into 5 different categories devoted to each coup or coup attempt in Turkey. We have quite a long list of novels that depict September 12th military coup in Turkey, but none of them, again, are narrated from the perspective of 2 elementary school kids. So this is the first time The Mute of Swans tells the coup from the eyes of 2 elementary school kids, and the novel is presented to us in the form of, if you have seen the novel and the chapters, as an elementary school textbook. So I want to say welcome to Ece and thank her for being here.
Such a lovely day, especially.
And I want to start our conversation first asking her about this transition from journalism to novel writing, from journalistic expression to literary one. How did that happen?
Okay. It is like, you just cut the chase. So, I don't think that journalism and literature, and in that respect, even poetry, is completely different things than each other. I do think that all writing, in its essence, is poetry. It's just you dilute it with reality, and it becomes a novel. And then you put a lot of reality in it, and then it becomes journalism. I think all writing in its essence is poetry, and what I'm doing, in fact, is diluted forms of poetry. I also wrote poetry and I published poetry. In fact, one of the poetry books I wrote, The Book of the Edge, is in English, and it was published in San Francisco years ago. And I started with poetry. I went into journalism thinking that journalism is the closest thing to be a writer, which was a complete mistake. And then I did journalism as a storyteller. What I do is, as a matter of fact, is storytelling, and I do it in different forms. I do not believe in these divisions, so to speak. And it's all about how you construct the narrative, and how the story requires, what kind of construction the story requires. The stories I told sometimes required a form of journalism, whereas sometimes it was only possible to tell the story through a novel. So this is more or less my question, and I kept on thinking about this seemingly dual situation, and most of the people think that it's a duality between, living between journalism and fiction, and they mostly think that fiction and reality are separate things. But I've been to countries, I've seen things, and I experienced certain things that now fiction and reality are not so much different than the other. As you said, Banana Sounds, the first novel I wrote, I lived in Beirut to write that novel, and I spent 6 months to do the research in the archives, in the newspapers archives. And the things I saw in these newspapers from 1960 to 2006 were so ridiculous that they couldn't have been in fiction. Fiction couldn't have that poetic license. And you know, as you said, my first two novels are taking place in Middle East, where reality surpasses fiction. Like there is no tomorrow. So, you know, a little story about that, if I have time. Sure. Yeah. When I was doing the research in the newspaper archives, there was and I was especially concentrated on the civil war in Lebanon. I was even reading the little ads. So I saw this little ad. This is the height of civil war in Beirut. Everybody literally killing everybody in that time. So I saw this. 2009? No, this is 1960s, 1970s, in fact, 70s. So this ad goes something like this. A guy obviously lost his dog, and he says, I lost my dog, and his name is Fahd. And then a few days, you know, you go a few days more, and the same ad again. I lost my dog. His name is Fahd, and he answers to his name. And then you go a few days more, dozens of people are killed meanwhile, and then the same ad again. I lost my dog. His name is Fahd. He answers to his name, and his one ear is down. So how can you write this as a fiction? This is so surreal. Everybody is killing everybody, and meanwhile this guy is looking for this dog which has one ear down. So, you know, I always, except for the Time of Mute Swans, I always place my novels where fiction is so helpless in a way, and where reality takes over the job of creating the magic and the mesmerizing shocks, let's say. So I do not think that these are different things, so to speak.
My second question is about the locale. So I already insisted in my introduction that your first two novels are not set in Turkey at all. And then your readers, I was following your journalistic work, and I was following things were written on you back at the time, and your readers were expecting a fiction, a novel from you that actually focused on the political chaos of Turkey. But then with the third one, you came back home, you came to Turkey, but you didn't write about current things. You go back in time and wrote about 1980. So now my question is, did you need this physical and temporal space between you and Turkey to have artistic creativity? Or was this more organic to write about Middle East because you were there?
Most of the people are from Turkey here. I can see faces. There's a different look. It's not the features. It's the way that people look. Huh? People look, yeah. And that's why I can recognize a Turkish person the way they look, you know. And I can write a long essay on that.
Good one.
Hopefully. The thing is, so therefore many of you here already know that Turkey is a place where you feel emotionally loaded, and there are a lot of baggages. There are a lot of untangled issues, let's say. And it's not easy for a writer to write about something that she is or he is personally loaded, emotionally loaded. That's why it took me such a long time to come to Turkey with my literature, sort of. And I have been a journalist throughout 20 years, and what I did was basically to write about the suppressed, to write about the oppressed, the unfortunate, and dismissed, and outcast, whatever you call it. So my life and my memory was full of all these horrible pictures, and all those pictures make you feel responsible, so to speak. And it makes you feel responsible in literary way as well, because you feel like if I don't tell all these stories, it would be unfair to the ones that I missed. So it took me a lot of time to understand that you cannot write everything. You choose one single thing, and you then start, talking about everything over, through that one certain thing. it took me a lot of time to master my craft as well, to write about Turkey, which is not an easy thing. And as you know, as for not writing about current issues, but 1980, I don't think that 1980 is a past story. I do not think that it's a story about the past. I do really believe that it's a story of today. It was a coincidence, of course. After I published a novel, there was a coup attempt in 2016. And devir, the Turkish word, also means cycle. There are a lot of meanings to that name. And the reason I gave to this title to this novel was actually that meaning. It's a cycle. Turkish history is a cycle. Turkish political history is a cycle. And each and every time when there is a coup, a progressive generation is rooted out, which leaves the country more barren intellectually than it already was. So I thought how much of a uprooting, how much of oppression can a country take, and what will happen in the end? All these good people of Turkey, would they disappear after certain enough amount of coups? Would they go away? Would they be like non-existent anymore? So the question, my main question was, what will happen to this country? And in order to see the future, so to speak, I felt compelled to look at the past. And it's not only novels. Throughout my journalism, I was obsessed with the question, what makes memory? What constructs memory? How do we remember? How do we forget? Especially when I was writing Deep Mountain across the Turkish-Armenian divide, I happened to think about this a lot. So, and I came to a point to think that remembering is a form of forgetting. And our memories are not total sums of past events. What we remember about past is actually determined by the storyteller, the powerful storyteller of today, of the present time. So I tried to remember what happened in 1980, because I think 1980 military coup was the starting point for Turkey to go down. And what happens in Turkey today is, a big chunk of it actually is because of 1980 military coup. And the ability of the coup to change not only the politics of the country, but also the human fabric, the ethical values, the set of values, and so on. So as I try to remember what happened, because I was 8 years old when the coup happened, I remembered things that I don't remember forgetting. And then for this novel as well, I went to Ankara, the capital city of Turkey, and I lived there for a year to write the novel and to do the research in Parliament archives. And I started asking people their stories. And what I found mostly was that they were the same. They were feeling the same thing. They didn't remember forgetting these stories. And as you ask questions about their stories, they remembered that they forgot. It's not they remember what they forgot, but they remembered that they forgot, and that was sort of interesting for both me and them. And also, it was impossible not to write a novel after what I saw in those archives. Turkey, like the other Middle Eastern countries, is a place where reality surpasses fiction with its, enormously shocking aspect. So I saw this real story, which is amazing to me. According to this real story, and this is in the heart of Time of Mute Swans, this story, the top general of military coup, Kenan Evren, decides to build a park. There is already a park in Ankara, which is a very, very famous park Kulu Park, which is called Swan Park. And there are swans in this park. So, but Kenan Evren decides to build a new park. And he thinks this park also, needs some swans. So he takes the swans from Kulu Park and he puts them in Seymenler. The horrible thing is, the swans hate their new place and they want to go back. And they start flying. However, they hit the tall buildings and they die. So Kenan Evren, the top general of the military coup, decides that he needs to take a serious action. So he orders the veterinary faculty to perform a surgical operation on swans so that they cannot fly. You can see the original graphics of this surgical operation in the book. The veterinaries removed certain bone from the wings of the swans so they couldn't fly anymore. This is real story. And then there's another real story. The swans migrating from Siberia for the first time in history stopped in Turkey in 1980, the year of the military coup. And then on, they kept on coming. Until, when? 2013, Gezi protests. It's a circle. The interesting part of knowing this information is that I was receiving the same answers when I asked the people in Ankara this question: do you think swans can fly? And they all said no, swans cannot fly. They all thought that swans couldn't fly naturally, So it was as if the military coup made them forget that the swans can fly, people are capable of changing their environment, capable of changing their country's destiny and so on. And it was as if the job of swans was to remind people of Turkey that the swans can actually fly by migrating from Siberia to Turkey. And at the end, when they finally remembered that the swans could fly and people are capable of saying no to the oppressor in 2013, they stopped coming because their job was done to remind people of swans and themselves. So when you know these stories, it's almost impossible not to write a novel, right? This is magical. So therefore, the novel is not about the past, but it is actually today. I wouldn't have written this novel, by the way, if there wasn't Gezi protests, because there wouldn't be a generation to hand over the information about the people who resisted in 1980s. That story would be, wouldn't have a new owner to hand over to. And I saw these young people in 2013 during Gezi protests, and they were lacking the knowledge of what happened before 1980. Because what we have been, because there is a big difference between not forgetting and remembering. There's a wide gap in between these two acts, not forgetting and remembering. These young people were mostly told not to forget that 1980 happened, that these people died, that these people were defeated, that many tragedies happened in this country. Whereas they were never told to remember what happened before. So the entire story was very different than what they remembered. So that is why I thought these young people need to know the other part of the story, and actually the most important part of the story before the defeat came along. Another real story which caused me to, which enabled me to write this novel was during Gezi protests, I'm sure you know or heard, there was this massive tear gas attack from police to the protesters. And this was also, it wasn't only in Istanbul, but in several other cities, including Ankara. So I was in Ankara on the first day of Gezi, and there was this tear gas attack, and there were some people from METÜ, Middle Eastern Technical University, and they were selflessly trying to protect the swans in Kulu Park because the tear gas attack was happening there. And I never forgot this. You know, these kids trying to protect the birds, and they were, you know, trying to hug the birds, and, you know, they tried to run with. And by the way, swans are huge animals, like so. They were trying very hard. So I thought these guys should have predecessors in Turkish history. So therefore, I created Ali and Ayşe, you know, 2 8-year-old kids during 1980 military coup. And they are, in fact, the mothers and fathers of these young people who, you know, who protested during Gezi protests. So that's why it was a cycle. It's not only the defeat, it's not only the military coups, as you said in your introduction, it's also the resistance, which is cycling as well. It's not only perpetrators, not only oppressors that come along each 10 years, each decade, but also the ones who resist. The good ones are, you know, coming back as well, despite the fact that they are oppressed each time. So, and in order to see this, you have to remember what happened then, but you have to remember the entire story, the whole story. And this is what I have been not obsessed, but I have been focusing on, not only in this novel, but throughout my whole writing, to tell the whole story, to tell the entire story, not the, you know, not the story that is reduced by the political power.
I think what you said about the cycle, and it's not only a cycle of oppressors, but also the protesters or the uprisers, that what makes the Time of Mute Swans an unconventionally optimistic coup novel, if there's such a thing, if there's an optimistic coup novel, it makes it unconventionally optimistic.
I'm not.
I mean, it is pessimistic in a way to know that this will happen again and again and again. As I said, we have 5 different categories under coup literature in Turkey for every single coup we have, right? So it could be 6, 7, we don't know. But to see that the protesters or the people who would resist also come along with the other one is kind of optimistic, you have to say.
I am not known for my optimism. You know, on the contrary, I'm famous for my pessimism, in fact. Or they think it's pessimism, it's just being realistic, and, you know, but then, you know, most of the time when I give a speech, somebody, and probably if I didn't say that, there would be somebody here asking the same question. Somebody asks, is there hope? So any one of you thinking that question, don't. Now I'm answering it. And I kept saying the same thing. It became a motto of some sorts. I don't believe in hope. I am more interested in determination. Seriously, because hope is a word which is too fragile for certain times, and we are actually going through one of those times as Turkish peoples of Turkey. I have a Dutch editor, amazing woman. She's Jewish. And once she told me a story about her grandfather and grandmother. Her grandfather and grandmother met in one of the concentration camps during, you know, Nazi era. And the guy, the young man, falls in love with a young woman, and they will turn out to be my editor's grandfather and grandmother later. And there's nothing in the concentration camp. So somehow, I don't know how, and he sticks the cabbage to a stick, and he gives this cabbage to the young woman, and then they fall in love. So what I see in this story is not hope. What I see in this story is determination to create beauty. And on the other side, determination to see beauty in a cabbage. So I think you can take the hope from a human being, but you cannot take out the determination of creating beauty. And when I say beauty, I don't mean the, flowers, birds singing and, all that, pastoral thing. I mean the very essence of human ethics. And that is why I think there will be a cycle, yes. There will be ones who will think that, oh, this is a cabbage, because they are brilliant. And there will be ones who will think that, no, this is a rose. Now it's a rose. And being optimistic is, I do think that art in general, and writing in particular, has a duty, ethical duty, in fact. Not to be optimistic, certainly not. But you cannot be hopeless if you are planning to create art, or if you are planning to write. It's not because it is, I don't know, it's pessimistic, but because it is too arrogant to be hopeless. As a writer, I don't think that I am I'm giving the biggest struggle in the world. I don't think that I am suffering more than other people. There are people who are suffering much more than me. One, therefore I cannot be hopeless. Even if I am hopeless, I cannot say that I am hopeless. And second, being hopeless and transmitting this information and this sentiment to the next generation is extremely arrogant. Well, maybe you fucked up, but maybe they won't. So keep your negative story to yourself, because they might manage at the end. So I don't know if it will be a cycle, this cycle will go on forever, oppression and resistance and oppression and resistance. But I cannot tell that, don't resist, because there will be an oppression coming again. Maybe they will, kill all evil in the world. I cannot make that prediction on behalf of them, and that would make me a stupid person, I think.
So you're loading a lot of mission on fiction.
Mission, yes.
So going back to the Arabic root, like edebiyat,
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. I'm a moralist, unfortunately. I would like to be, I wouldn't like to be a moralist, but I am, I think, a moralist, yes. It's an unfortunate burden. And it comes from my family. It comes from people I know, and it comes from the responsibility I feel towards them. In Middle Eastern countries, including Turkey, kids are raised with the responsibility of fighting the war that has been fought by their parents, and where their parents were defeated. It's actually this is the tragic cycle, and it gives you it puts some sort of responsibility on your shoulders. Although this can make me a mediocre writer, maybe, but I think being a better person and not forgetting those responsibilities are still more important to me than being a better writer. At the end of Women Who Blow on Nuts, I don't know if maybe some of you read that novel. There's this tiny thing about the ending of that novel. I don't want to spoil for those who want to read the novel, but the narrator and one of the characters talk, and one of the characters, who is a friend of the narrator, says, "Of course you won't write the real ending, because you have to protect us." And the narrator says, "Of course, I won't."
And that's you?
Yeah, that's me. I do believe in, human beings, which is an unfortunate thing, because I wish I could believe in God rather than human beings, But, yeah, I do believe in human beings, and I'm, although some humans are refuting my belief constantly, I think this is our ethical duty to believe in human beings.
Thank you. you. So I have many more questions, but I think we should open the floor for questions from our audience.
Opa.
We have microphones.
Yeah, I think you're depressed enough not to ask any questions. This
Have
happens all the time.
no questions?
Everything was clear.
Thank you for being here, Ece.
Thank you for coming.
Can you tell us where do you live now, and the reason why you cannot go back to Turkey, or what is so How do you manage?
It's not that I cannot go back to Turkey to start with. It's just I am working on a book, and it requires me to have full concentration, and Turkey has become a quite frenzy country, as you know. Like it's a mess, political mess, and it's not impossible to it is impossible to concentrate on any kind of intellectual work, and I have the luxury to go out, so I go out of the country, so I did. And one funny story about it, after I wrote Turkey, Insane and Melancholy, the book somehow coincided with the 2016 coup attempt, so it got a lot of media attention in London. I was on Hard Talk, in several other medias and so on. And when I was coming back to Turkey from London from the book tour, I was at the passport line, and this was the time when they started confiscating the passports of the opposing voices and so on, or they prosecute you on the border. So the passport lady took my passport, looked at me, looked at the passport, looked at me, and it's like, for ages, this went for ages, and I'm thinking, okay, now it's happening now. It's happening to me, like, they are either arresting me or taking the passport away. And she screamed, Ece Temelkuran, can we take a selfie? Oh my God, I was in tears and I'm laughing, with my face like deformed with several emotions. And I thought, I don't want to take this again, because it was either selfie or prosecution. Yeah, like you cannot live in this wide range of unpredictability. So, and you become obsessed with the idea something will happen to me or somebody I love, and you start, it diminishes your capacity of thinking. And one more thing, which is the intellectual reason, actually. I noticed since years, I was telling Burcu earlier, when the oppressor is primitive, the criticism of that oppression, or the resistance, so to speak, is becoming primitive accordingly. So your job becomes saying no, no, no, and then there is no time or space to feel, beneath that no. Why am I saying no? Because things are happening in a, dizzying speed and so on. And this is one part of this primitive, intellectual reason being primitive, being forced to be primitive, so to speak. And the second part of it is, certain things are happening and you have to oppose them, and it is so embarrassing. Okay, at some point, we all had to say out loud that adults shouldn't be raping kids because it's wrong. And it is embarrassing for me to say this. There were these rape cases in Turkey, and as everything else, it was politicized, and opposing it or criticizing the rape, child molestation, became a political thing, So I don't want to see myself as this person who's trying to prove that child molesting is a horrible thing. Yeah, we are, all of us, who think of Turkey, who work for the future of this country, in several different places, in several different ways, we are doing our job. And I am doing my job, I'd like to believe so. I'm doing my job by telling the entire story about Turkey. Because for the recent years, especially, Turkey has become, for the mainstream Western media, especially, Turkey has become this crazy country that everything can happen. It's not like that. There are people who are resisting. There are people who are, who are opposing this political power. And representation of Turkey should not be limited to this government and so on. And this is my job now. I can speak English, so I am supposed to tell this story. And this is what I'm doing as much as I can. Although Queen letter was not,
Well, I was going to say, you're not in Turkey, but you have to deal with this.
Yeah. Okay, for those who didn't read the piece, it was a Guardian article, and Mr. Erdogan is now actually in London, and he is visiting the Queen of England and Prime Minister Theresa May and so on and so forth. So Guardian asked me to write a piece about this visit. So I wrote a totally sarcastic letter to Queen of England. Yeah. And and the funny part is, it's not funny, of course. AKP trolls started a massive attack, as they always do, saying that Ece Temelkuran, the leftist, is now begging the Queen of England. They took it seriously. This is one part, and this funny, actually the really funny part is not only Turkish people, but some British people as well didn't see the joke, and they thought that I believed that the Queen could tell something political to president. So they were trying to teach me that the Queen is politically neutral. She cannot say that. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You watch The Crown, right?
Yeah, and by the way, yeah, most of these people's knowledge of aristocracy is limited to the Crown series, Netflix. So probably they saw that. Oh, yeah, the Queen is neutral. Yeah. So yeah, that was it actually.
Another question?
There's a lady here.
Hi, Merhaba.
I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you about your experience as a journalist in Turkey and how your career was and how it went down, and what do you think of the state of press freedom?
Yeah, quite a broad. Well, my career is like anyone else's mostly. I started as a doormat. Nobody said hello to me for 6 months, and then I became a reporter. And I did everything from economy to European Union news or cultural news and so on, political news, and everything you can think of. And then I became a columnist, political columnist. And for 10 years I did that, and I was in Tunisia writing Women Who Blow a Knot, trying to start that novel. And I received this call from my editor-in-chief after I wrote 2 articles critical of the government. And it was a 15-second phone call saying, thank you, you know why? And I said, I know why. And so thank you, end of story. Yeah, this is how this is how I was fired. The funny part of firing is not getting fired. It's okay. The horrible part, I should admit, is that the political stigma. You're stigmatized. Now you're fired for political reasons. This means that nobody can hire you anymore. So you are basically desperate for doing journalism, and they don't let you do that. So I started writing for Guardian, New York Times, and several other media. And I think I feel like a Dundalian now. They thought, oh, this is an annoying Dundalian. Let's just blow it off, and then I'm all over the place. So it's good. Things happen to you. If you're a journalist and if you are critical of the power, which I believe is the job of journalism, things happen to you. The important part is to keep going. Yeah, there is this. Are you going to be a journalist?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, here's.
Not interested.
It's more or less same everywhere actually now. The thing is, they brought this new concept to journalism, and we all voted for the last 30 years. After 1980, this happened. And I'm not talking about Turkish journalism, by the way, I'm talking global journalism. They brought this objectivity, you know, the obsession with objectivity, and more importantly, obsession with being balanced. And they sold this being balanced stuff to us, but it was actually being neutral. So journalism was stripped off from its ethical background. You become a journalist because you want to question power on behalf of and with the people. This is journalism. And they made this, ethics of journalism into a personal choice, a personal political stand. Therefore, on Twitter now you see these journalists, and on their profile they always write, the tweets are my personal blah blah. There's no such thing. It is a political job. It's a very, very political job. And being political is the very essence of being a journalist. But since the world has changed, the dominant narrative has changed throughout 1980s, not only about politics, but also about everything else, and economy and so on and so forth, the narrative about journalism has changed as well. And I don't buy that. And those who don't buy that, somehow somehow end up in the same position, either being sacked or not being hired, not being desired, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's my answer to you.
We'll take two more questions.
Hi. So first of all, thank you so much for being this empowered, influential woman.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I have a question that I find hard to navigate, to circle through that. So we all try to do things in our own deeds, but somehow it tends to get limited to the people who are already like us, who are intellectuals, who share same thoughts like us, and as somebody who extended her circle that much, how do you find that? So I guess my question is that how can you reach out more to those folks who actually need to hear us? Does that make
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think, and if I'm not wrong, I can imagine where you're coming from with this question. You're living in this country, I'm assuming that, yeah?
True.
Are you an American citizen?
I would say I'm a permanent resident.
Yeah, all right. So you are voting? No.
Am I what?
Are you voting?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So you are interested in politics. I was trying to understand that. I'm writing a new book. Actually, I should tell that first. I'm writing a new book, and it's a political nonfiction, and it's called How to Lose a Country, The New Ice Age of Politics. If everything goes right, it's going to be in the United States and several other countries in first week of February 2019. So the book is about global pattern of rising right-wing populism, because I do believe that there is a global pattern in each country, like we went through in Turkey. This rising right-wing populism operates more or less the same way. Therefore, I am, since I'm writing this book, I'm following American and European politics closely since more than a year now. And this country now is going through the first phase of polarization. So that's why I think you're asking this question, polarization, and like, you know, are we talking to our own kind only? What are we going to do with these Trump orders and so on? I have been giving speeches on East Coast, in Harvard, in MIT, in several other places, Columbia University, and now I'm coming from Seattle. Before that it was Portland, and I'm going to UCLA. And I'm talking to people, and most of the people, especially in universities, are not suffering, but trying to find an answer to a question like this, or similar questions. And this country has been through a lot, and one of the reasons I think that the Time of Mute Swans is not about only Turkey, but also about United States, is that you have been through the same memory delete through 1980s. When people, let's say you watch a documentary on one of the mainstream televisions in the United States, and it's talking about 1970s. What do you see in this documentary? Okay, what is the first thing that comes to you when I say 1970s United States? It is the hippies, the same naked girl dancing like crazy, high on weed, and this is the dominant narrative about 1970s. Whereas 1970s was a different thing. They don't tell you about the Marxists in Harlem. They don't tell you about the Black Panthers serving free breakfast for kids. They don't tell you about the people who try to organize and mobilize the poor, and they wanted to construct another life, another United States, which was actually far better than this one. So this memory erasing happened to us in Turkey with military coup, but it happened here with the takeover, with the enormous attack of neoliberalism to the institutions of the society. And since then, young people especially think that it is their own personal idea to say, I hate politics. I hate politics became a popular statement after 1980, and this was taught to American people, taught to European people. You don't hate politics. It's just they want you to hate politics, and they made the politics they transformed the politics in a certain way that it became a seemingly disgusting thing. And also, on ethical and societal level, throughout 1980s, antagonism, confrontation, discussion, became a no-no. I don't judge you thing, which is very popular in this country. No, I judge you. You judge me too. And we discuss, and then we find a common ground. And we don't have to love each other, by the way, but we cohabit. But we have to talk about ideas, and these ideas must be knowledgeable ideas, like informed ideas. Ousting antagonism, confrontation, and discussion, disgracing politics, and making the winners and losers device, turning the winners and losers device to a natural phenomenon, and several other things has been imposed on this country. I took a roundabout when I came to your question because I wanted to tell these things in order to answer the question. Therefore, my answer to your question is, we all have this idea that we have a circle, we are talking within this circle, we cannot reach out. And my actually answer / question to you, do you really do that? Do you really talk to your own kind? Do you really discuss politics within this university, people like you? Or do you just hate Trump? Before during these decades that started in 1980s, depolitization of communication was huge. And at the end of the day, in 2018, when there is a huge political question in the United States, the only solution that many people can come up with is showing empathy. Since Trump is elected, you see this empathy thing, circulating, I'm sure, especially in mainstream media. We have to understand them. We have to talk to them. We have to understand what they feel. I was earlier in Oxford giving a speech with Obama Foundation CEO, David Simas, and he's a political guy. He was the former political advisor of Obama, and his answer to the question of America was creating empathy. Oh, seriously. But we cannot, solve political questions with couple therapy techniques, right? This is politics. And one of the good things that Trump did this to country is politicizing people, although it's not right way of politicization. But anyway, people are, again, still, after years, they're talking about politics. This is good. But my question is, are you really talking to your own kind? Because don't waste energy with this empathy shit. It doesn't work. We tried it in Turkey for a decade. We tried to understand why, And then empathy carries along another word, which I love, respect. No, I don't respect, because it's an ethical failure to support a man who called a dead kid terrorist, Berkin Elvan, who was shot by a tear gas canister, and he was in a coma for a year, and he died when he was 15. And I always say this: he was lighter than his coffin when he died. So I cannot empathize. I don't want to empathize with them anymore. I don't want to respect. So therefore, I want to speak to my own kind, and I want to speak to them about what we are going to do. I hope I could answer to your question.
So let's take one more. Okay, last question.
Hi, thank you very much for your discussion.
Thank you.
When you were talking about determination, it really reminded me of Yashar Kemal's twinkle in his eye that he talks about in some of his books. And also, at some point you corrected yourself after having said the Turkish people, you said peoples of Turkey. So I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry for asking you a predictive future question, but do you see the Kurdish question as being the winning, rallying, awakening point for the Turkish left?
Mm-hmm. I'm a lawyer. Do you know that? By education, I'm a lawyer. And I didn't practice law at all, except for one day for Kurdish kids. In 2003, I guess. I'm wrong about the dates always. There was this riot, children's riot in Diyarbakir, and they were throwing stones at children, and more than 100 kids were tortured, and most of the kids were imprisoned, and they were treated as adult terrorists by the law. So as a symbolic act, totally, I wore my gown, because we wear gowns in Turkey as lawyers, and I showed up in the courtroom. I was so lucky they were released that day, so my lawyer life is like 100% success. Anyway, it's normally a horrible story. There's nothing to laugh about that story, but it was a funny day. The reason I told you this, for Kurdish question, not because they are Kurds, but it was a serious human rights question, I became a lawyer for one day, and I went beyond, I became a lawyer, and I wrote massively about Kurdish question, and I did reportage on Kurdish question, and Kurdish question has been a human rights issue for Turkey for several decades. However, unfortunately, in the last period, it became a Middle Eastern issue, an issue of Middle East, one of those unending unsoluble, questions, sort of. It was a question of Turkey, but now it's not anymore. One of the outcomes is that I cannot follow it anymore because the information flow is not dependable as much as it was before. And second, their political leader, the political leader of the Kurdish party, HDP, is in prison. And there are many, the public figures from that party are prisoned as well. So there is there is less people who are doing politics about it. And there was a peace process in Turkey between the government and PKK, by the way, not the party. And that process was totally unknowable. It wasn't a transparent process. So, and I was against that process. That's why both Kurds and Turks hated me at the time, saying that it's not transparent, so we don't know what's going on. We have to, include all the intellectuals and the society should be included in this process, which didn't happen, and therefore, as I predicted, it failed. So I cannot make a prediction, obviously, but I think all the people in Turkey who knows that unless this question is solved, the democratization of Turkey would be impossible. I know that many of the people, even though they are too afraid to talk sometimes, they know this by heart. So unfortunately, I cannot predict anything. One last question.
That was
Yeah.
the last question.
Yeah? Okay.
Is there any more enthusiastic? One last one. Yes.
Thank you. I guess I'll just ask my question. So you talked about that thing about empathy in the U.S., like between political parties as the solution to everything. And you also just talked about the Kurdish question. So there's an article in Al Jazeera. It's titled, "This is what being a Kurd is about." And it quotes you. Oh yeah. It quotes you.
Oh.
You have to tell people why their kids are dead and why you don't want them to be killed anymore. And therefore, you have to say that this state is not sacred. And then later he said, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. And another part he said, or they quote you that you said, peace is not simply a contract, it is a process involving open dialogue, forgiveness, and understanding.
Exactly. So why do I do this empathy thing? Why am I rejecting empathy when it comes to? Is this a question?
Yeah.
All right.
Question,
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I wanted to follow up, but so what do you mean by forgiveness in this one? Like forgiveness by whom? For whom?
Anatolia, where Turkey is a very ancient land, and it has been a passage back and forth, and it's like a bridge. You cannot really live on a bridge. You pass the bridge. So it is like that throughout human history. Tribes and nations and people have been passing through that. Therefore, it is full of tragedies. There's this famous Chinese word like damnation, saying, "May you live in interesting times." Anatolia has been living interesting times since time immemorial. So there is this culture of forgetting in Anatolia. It goes for Armenians, it goes for Kurds, it goes for many other, ethnicities and religions. These things probably happened so fast that they did not have time to stop and forgive or forgive. As a matter of fact, one of my friends lately was saying, "You know what? We have to close the country yes, we have to close the country. We have cheese, we have tomato, we have bread, and we have to make a statement to the entire world. We are not going to do anything for 3 years. We're going to think. You know, we need some time now. I do really think that that would be great. Yeah, we're just going to think now. So forgiveness is, those tragedies have to be forgiven by the victims, obviously, and perpetrators should forgive themselves as well. But since there are layers of unforgiven and forgotten tragedies in that soil, it's not easy to establish this culture of reconciliation. And I was one of the desperate voices for several ethnicities and for several religions to start this reconciliation process, to get rid of the past sins and to get rid of the past angers, because it's an amazing, amazing country, and Anatolia is one of the cradles of humanity. Yeah, this is all I could say, I think, about that.
With that, we will end the night and thank
you.
Thank you,
You've
Jeff,
been
for
wonderful.
coming.
Thank you.
She's all yours now.
Yeah.
If you want to have your books signed.